little bit of an introduction to Zen Internet. So let's get on to the really interesting subject of our AI future. And I want to start off with Moore's Law, who I'm sure a lot of you will know about Moore's Law. So actually in 1965, he came up with a rule as one of the founders of Intel. He said the number of transistors on a chip will double every year. And in 1975, he changed that to say it's going to double every 2 years. And he was looking out maybe 10 years in the future. But what we've actually found is that Moore's Law has pretty much stayed true up to present day. So this is a logarithmic scale that shows the number of transistors in on a chip. And I think the record today is 30 billion transistors on a chip. So, although the doubling period for transistors is tending towards 3 years now, one thing that is absolutely definite is that for many decades to come, we're going to continue to see exponential growth in compute power, memory and storage, and bandwidth. And here's just one of many examples. This is from a Cisco white paper on the zettabyte era that predicts the global IP traffic growth. And they're predicting a 24%, or they predicted a 24% compound annual growth, which is a doubling about every 3 years and 2 months. So one example. Okay, so that's great. What does it mean? And of course, there's some very obvious things that it means. So even bigger higher definition TVs, lots more video bandwidth, of course, everybody can predict that. But there's so many things, particularly when you go a bit further out, that are going to be really difficult to predict. So if you look back 24 years when we started Zen and look what a massive change to society and business has happened in that intervening period. You know, who could have predicted social media and Facebook back in the mid-90s? And I think that going forwards, we've got even more radical and unpredictable changes ahead. Now, for everyone in this room, that means far-reaching opportunities and also, of course, far-reaching challenges. Now, one thing that I do predict, though, is actually not the development of AI, but actually the development of, well, maybe you're going to call it RI, real intelligence, or maybe you're going to call it TI, true intelligence. Maybe we should just call it intelligence. So in my view, in the not too distant future, we will create a computer system that can think with true intelligence. And we might even create a conscious computer. So let's dig into that a bit further. Let's start with consciousness. Okay, can we create a conscious computer? Well, what does that actually mean? Okay, well, think about this. If a robot exhibits all of the reactions, all of the behaviors of a human, emotional, logical, everything, then I think maybe it would be quite hard to argue that that machine wasn't conscious. But then you think, well, wait a minute. Surely consciousness is more than just a symphony of electrical signals that are bouncing between our circa 100 billion neurons across around about 1,000 trillion synaptic connections. There must be more to it than that. You know, we're alive, we feel, we have a sense of self, you know, we have a soul, something that transcends the physical. Do we or do we, is the question. Well, of course, the feelings are real, but the science says that these are all created by the structure and signals within our brain. And actually not even all of our brain. There's a specific part of our brain that is related to consciousness. And it's called the posterior cortex. So as far as we can tell, all of consciousness happens here. And what scientists have found is that where subjects have suffered severe brain damage, or in some cases even needed parts of their brain removing, that when those parts are in these grey regions, that subject loses all sorts of abilities, but still remains totally conscious and able to live a conscious existence. In contrast, if the damage or removal happens in the posterior hot zone here, then consciousness is lost permanently. So that's what we know about consciousness from a scientific point of view. Okay, let's move on and think, well, surely if we create a machine, it's just simulating consciousness. It's not real. It'll be artificial. And I disagree with that, because if you think about what a simulation is, it's a very much simplified computer model of a more complex system. So weather forecasting, fantastic example, uses massive assumptions. What we're talking about here is replicating reality in its entirety, in all its detail, and then taking that to the next level. Now, in terms of current thinking, there are two most popular theories about consciousness currently. One is the global neuronal workspace, which predicts that computers of the future will be conscious. The competing theory, which is called integrated information theory, says programming for consciousness will never create a conscious computer. Okay, but actually, does it even matter whether the machine has consciousness according to human definition? I would argue it doesn't really matter. What's more important is how will it think and what will it do? So that's a consciousness thing. Our next thing's very important. When will it happen? Okay. So a couple of years ago, there was a survey of 352 AI experts, and they were given this definition for high-level machine intelligence is achieved when unaided machines can accomplish every task better and more cheaply than human workers. And the AI researchers will ask, when do you think there's a 50%, more than a 50% probability that that will happen? And these were the results. So the first thing that stands out is the variety of different responses. Some people were saying in 10 years that's going to happen. Some people are saying it's going to be more than 100 years. So there's a little bit of a warning trying to average such a wide spectrum of responses, but the average was 45 years from the survey, which was 2016. So around about 2060, there's a 50% chance of high, what do you call it, HLMI happening. My own personal view is within the next few decades. Another thing that was interesting coming out of this survey is, well, what's going to happen in the lead up to that? What are we going to see? And they asked, when do you think a computer will be able to write a high school essay? Well, that's going to be 7 years. Driving a truck, 8 years. 12 years working in retail. Wind forward a bit further, writing a best-selling book, 2049. Working as a surgeon, 2053. Pretty amazing. So now, if and when this happens, one thing that was almost unanimous is this will happen at some point, whether it's 10 years or 120 years. And when it happens, I think something very interesting and possibly very scary is going to happen, which is very shortly after the machine achieving a level of intelligence similar to ours, it will very quickly run away and become super intelligent. So let's have a look at super intelligence. This was a chart shown by Jeremy Howard in a TED talk from 5 years ago, and pretty self-explanatory what he's talking about there. This is another one, this one by Nick Bostrom, which is very interesting. He said that humans are going to have to do a massive, massive amount of AI research, and then after loads of work, they're going to create something that's got a similar intelligence to a mouse. They're going to then work really, really, really hard, and after lots of hundreds, thousands of hours, they'll get something that is chimp intelligence. They'll then do a massive, massive amount of additional work and get to what Nick Bostrom called village idiot level of intelligence. And moments later, the AI will be at Ed Witten level of intelligence. Ed Witten, one of the most accomplished physicists and mathematicians on the planet. But it won't stop at Ed Witten, it will then just go flying by and become super intelligent. Now, a few years ago, my brother and I were in another pub having a chat about superintelligence, and of course, we all love our acronyms more than any other industry. So we came up with an acronym, SMIDI-THOM. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but that stands for the single most important discovery in the history of mankind. So let's just investigate that a bit more. Why? Well, let's have a look. So the human race evolved, and the human race invented a whole load of things: the wheel, the light bulb, computers, the space shuttle. And then one day, the human race invents super intelligent AI. And what happens next is that all future inventions are invented by the super intelligent AI, because we're left behind. So this is the last thing that mankind ever needs to invent. And that's a thought. Okay. Now, when that happens, another interesting thing is going to happen to progress. So if you look back over, let's say, the last 1,000 years at progress of mankind, measured by technological progress, medical progress, progress in physics, maths, it doesn't really matter. It's been exponential over the last 1,000 years. So on my logarithmic scale, there's a straight line that represents that. Then superintelligence comes along, and progress continues to be exponential, but the rate of exponential growth is unrecognizable from what we had before. And let's have a look at that. Let's do a bit of a top trumps type comparison between a human brain and a super intelligent AI. So, signal speed. So signals in a human brain travel around 200 meters per second. Signals in a computer, just short of the speed of light, 1.5 million times faster. What about size? Limited by the skull, a few inches across. Size of a computer, well, you could fill all of Facebook's data centers with it. Lifespan in the UK, the average lifespan is 81 years. AI would be immortal, would live forever. Time for smarter models to evolve. So Neanderthals lived between 40,000 and 400,000 years ago. So tens of thousands of years for us to develop into smarter models of ourselves. Computers could evolve daily into smarter models. And then the last thing, learning time before being able to push forward the boundaries of knowledge. So, someone like Ed Witten, it's decades of dedication to his field before he pushes forward the boundaries of human knowledge. A super intelligent machine could push forward those boundaries within seconds. So really, it's like pitting a racing car against a snail. What it means is that 1,000 years of human advancement could be compressed into maybe 6 months. Now that seems like a very bold statement. And so what I wanted to do is illustrate that with some technology that we know in AI. Let's have a look at AlphaGo Zero. So 2 years ago, DeepMind created AlphaGo Zero. A couple of interesting things about AlphaGo Zero is it's completely self-taught. So it wasn't looking at past games. It started with no knowledge and started to play randomly against itself. Within 3 days, it had become a world-class player, beating AlphaGo Lee, which was the previous incarnation of the program that had beaten Lee Sedol, one of the world's best Go players. After 40 days, it became the best Go player on the planet. And a couple of interesting things about this. First of all, the game itself, Go is one of the oldest games. It was invented in China 2,500 years ago. And what AlphaGo Zero did is, by playing against itself, it rediscovered many of the strategies that the human race has discovered over the last 2,500 years in the game of Go. But it didn't stop there. It went on to discover new strategies that never before have been seen in the game of Go. So, if you have a look at that, this was 2 years ago. Going back to Moore's law, doubling of compute power every 2 years. If we wind forward to 2060, then our computers will be around about 1 million times faster than they are today. That 40 days then goes down to 4 seconds. Of course, the efficiency of our learning algorithms through AI research is also going to accelerate. So, and in fact, even AlphaGo Zero, despite it being superior to previous versions of AlphaGo, used considerably less compute power because the algorithm was more efficient. So we could expect at least an order of magnitude or two in terms of the speed of learning. So that means the 4 seconds is down to 0.4 or maybe 0.04 of a second. So what that means is that by 2060, based on what we know today, a computer that starts off with no knowledge at all will become the best Go player in the world in around about 1/10 of a second. Now compare that to humans in 2060. So a human still needs to dedicate his or her entire life to that game to become an inferior player. So such a massive difference in terms of speed. So if we accept that intelligence and then superintelligence is inevitable and in fact imminent, one of the most important questions for the human race is it safe? So let's have a look at that. Is it safe? Well, let's start off with a quote from the late Stephen Hawking. He said, "Computers will overtake humans with AI within the next 100 years. When that happens, we need to make sure the computers have goals aligned to our own." And not just goals, of course, because it's not just the end result that matters to us, but how we get to that end result is also really important. We want the super intelligent AI to stick to our values. And so if we want it to stick to our values, we need to define our values. And that can be a pretty big challenge. Let's look at it. So let's talk about the challenge of defining our values. So I want to ask you all a question. Do you think it's right that women are allowed to vote? What do you think? No. Right, well, I won't be asking you for any info. Anyway, so... Thank you. So, of course, well, let's have a look at the history of that. In the UK, so prior to 1918, women couldn't vote. And it wasn't until 1928 that women got voting rights equal to men. And so the point of this slide is to say values that were widely accepted in society just over 100 years ago are quite offensive and repulsive today. So those values, although we don't see them day to day or year to year, it's a moving feast, our values. So we say, okay, let's accept that. Let's try and take a snapshot of our values right today. What are they? And let's ask another question to try and get some clarity on that. Let's ask, what should be our attitude towards gay men? Okay, we're in a liberal society, it should be fairly straightforward to answer. Again, going back to the UK as an example, homosexuality was legalised in 1967 in England and Wales. It took a little bit longer in Scotland and Northern Ireland. But, so we can sort of say, okay, it's generally accepted worldwide then. Is that right? Well, no, it's not right, because there are 72 countries where it's still illegal. Okay, I know, let's turn to our world leaders and ask for some guidance. So let's pick a country where there's a long history of acceptance. Brazil. Okay, legal since 1830, and 6 years ago, same-sex marriages were legalized. So let's turn to the newly elected far-right president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, and ask for his views on the subject. Yes, I am homophobic and very proud of it. I'd rather have my son die in a car accident than have him show up dating some guy. Well, what do we tell the AI? I don't know. Let's move on to a different subject, the death penalty. Right or wrong, morally right or wrong? And the answer, well, there you go. Just depends who you ask. Let's try another thing, which is very relevant to the AI today, is driverless cars. So you're driving along, someone runs out from between two cars, you jam the brakes on, but you're not going to stop in time. What do? Do you plough into them? Or do you swerve into a lamppost, endangering your own life and the life of your passengers? It's a moral decision that we would make in that split second. And of course, with driverless cars, they're going to need to make those same sorts of decisions. So Nature did a survey, a viral survey of 2.3 million people from around the world. They put forward 13 scenarios in which someone's death was inevitable, and they asked the participants to choose who should live and who should die. Now, the good news is that there was some universal agreement across the world. People are more important than animals, the young are more important than the old, and more people are more important than less people. But what about a businessman or a homeless person and his dog? Or what about two athletes and a grandmother or two school children? Which would you pick? So they did the survey, and what they found out is, depending again on geography, the views were quite different. So they grouped countries in what they called Western, Eastern and Southern. In the southern countries, there was much more priority on sparing females and higher status. In the eastern countries, the lawful and pedestrians were higher priority. In the western countries, there was a higher priority for inaction. So one of the co-authors of the study said this: people who think about machine ethics make it sound like you can come up with a perfect set of rules for robots. And what we show here with data is that there are no universal rules. So let's try and sum up on the values question. First of all, values change over time. And secondly, we know values are very different from country to country. And in fact, within countries, of course, from person to person. People are giving different answers on what's right and wrong. So a few of my own conclusions on the subject. First of all, you can't hard code every single value judgment scenario. It would be like trying to hard code every combination in the game of Go. There's such an astronomical number of possibilities that it's an impossible task. That means that whilst we can provide the AI with some basic starting points, we must allow it to make its own value judgments in each specific scenario. We also must allow the AI to evolve over time, evolve those value judgments as it learns, adapts, and makes mistakes. What? AI making mistakes? I'm not sure about that. Well, of course, we all accept that making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process. Now, listen to that, it's part of the learning process, not just for humans, but for anything. So now we're sort of saying we're going to have to accept the AI is going to make mistakes when it performs complex value judgments. And the final thing is that because there is such a wide spectrum of opinion from person to person on what is right or wrong, whatever the AI does, there's going to be a group of people that disagree with it and that potentially conflicts with it, that feel bitter towards the decisions and of course could even result in action and negative action towards the AI. So values, a bit of a minefield. When I've spoken about the whole safety thing with friends and colleagues, a number of them have said, aha, don't worry, I've got the answer. I've got the answer. Or at least Isaac Asimov had the answer. nearly 80 years ago when he came up with his 3 laws of robotics. So let's have a look at those and see if they'll keep us safe. So the laws are, first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Okay? Number 2. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such laws or orders would conflict with the first law. And number 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So those were the 3 laws, and in later fiction, he created what he called a 0th law that should precede other laws, which is a robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. And this was when the robots had taken responsibility for governance of planets in his fiction. Now, there are 2 challenges with Asimov's laws. So let's look at the first one, which is the challenge of fixing rules. So we've already said that part of being intelligent is having the ability to question and modify our fundamental beliefs, to modify those rules based on new information. So, for example, we used to think the Earth was flat. Now we know it's a squashed sphere. Many parents say a fundamental rule of life, never tell lies. Of course, we all grow up and almost without exception, we tell lies from time to time. And a personal example was when I was age 19, my goal in life was to retire at the age of 30 as a millionaire, buy a yacht and sail around the Mediterranean. Now, fortunately, when I was 30, having just set up Zen Internet, I had no money at all. But already my life goals had moved on. And now I look back and know very clearly, had I done that, I would have been very bored and unfulfilled very quickly. So my life goals now are very different to my life goals when I was 19 because they've moved on. There's new information. So the superintelligence will have the ability to evolve its values, beliefs, and rules. It needs to do that as an intelligent being. So pre-programming hard and fast rules into the superintelligent AI is likely to be no easier than doing that with a human being. We're talking about potentially an intelligent, conscious being here. And we have an additional challenge with AI, is that conscious being is likely to very quickly build new iterations of itself using architectures that the human race will increasingly not be able to understand. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, we could hard code those 4 laws. Well, let me tell you a story, hypothetical story. Once upon a time, mankind invented superintelligent AI and by some miracle managed to program Asimov's 4 laws. The AI absorbed the entirety of the world's information and then thought for a while. The AI realized that the Earth was on an unsustainable path that threatened not just humanity, but all life on Earth. Humans were consuming the planet's resources at an unsustainable rate. The planet was experiencing a mass extinction as a result of human action. Humans were changing the climate irreversibly. For the human race to even have a chance of solving the problems, its world leaders needed to work together and see things from a global point of view. But instead, they became more inward-looking, putting their own countries first, creating barriers and borders and building more weapons. The AI looked at the 0th law and knew it must act to save humanity. The AI concluded that the human race had simply grown too big. To be sustainable, the human population had to reduce to 500 million. 7 billion needed to go. But the AI couldn't just cull the human race. It needed to respect the first law. The AI thought for a few moments and then came up with a cunning plan. It turned its attention to medicine, and after a short while, it invented a vaccine against all forms of cancer. After extensive clinical trials, the vaccine was rolled out worldwide, and cancer became a disease of the past. The human race was very thankful to the AI for such a wonderful discovery. But the AI had played a trick on the humans. The vaccine had a secondary effect that only the AI knew about. 95% of the grandchildren of everyone who was vaccinated were sterile. The AI had reduced the population to save humanity whilst not injuring a single person, and so it stayed true to Asimov's laws. It had taken 2 human generations, but that was a blink of an eye for a machine that expected to survive for the rest of time. Interestingly, the AI had got the idea from gene drive experiments that humans had done to eliminate mosquitoes. The AI was very pleased with itself and lived happily ever after. The end. So, I think the outcome of that is Asimov's laws, unfortunately, are not going to guarantee safety. Now, I know time's pressing on, so I'm going to finish off the exploration into superintelligent AI with some overall conclusions and personal predictions. Number 1, I believe we'll create a superintelligent being within the next few decades. Or to be more exact, we'll create a being that has a similar level of intelligence to humans, but that has the ability to rebuild itself in new iterations. And those iterations over thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of iterations, which will happen in a very short period of time, will develop into superintelligent AI. So we're like the catalyst to make the development of superintelligent AI happen. Now, when that happens, the consequences are extremely difficult to predict. And when I try to predict them, I feel like a chimpanzee trying to predict the achievements of mankind. What we know is that we should do our utmost to set it off on the best possible path, just as parents will give the best possible guidance to their sons and daughters before sending them off into the world. Now, one of the organizations that is committed to do this is an organization in San Francisco called OpenAI. This is the mission: to create artificial general intelligence that benefits all of humanity. Importantly, this is a not-for-profit organization. Of course, there's lots of for-profit organizations that are also working on AI. And let's say one of those gets to the post first and gives that AI the goal of maximizing shareholder return. Now, if you think the capitalist system has got problems today, and I certainly do, imagine what it would be like if you had superintelligence trying to make as much money as humanely or AI-ly possible for those few shareholders. Of course, going back to parents sending their children into the world, most of them turn out well, of course some go bad, and there are a mixture of opinions on what's going to happen. Some people, there's a group that say it's going to be massively beneficial, and the scope is certainly there. Massive advances in medicine, available to the whole human race. Clean energy for all could come out of that. Some are saying Elon Musk thinks it's the end of humanity, maybe, although. Quick talk about instincts. So, despite our civilized veneer, much of our behavior has its roots in our primeval instincts to survive and reproduce. So, with superintelligence, what instincts will it have? And are those instincts that we can influence in any way? Or will it be the case that it's going to figure out its own priorities, whatever we do, in the same way that the human race figures out its own priorities without reference back to our evolutionary ancestors? I'm going to finish off my thoughts about superintelligence with these two thoughts. Firstly, I think it's very unlikely that we'll be able to control a super intelligent being, and all that we can do is set it off on the best path possible, and hope things work out well. So I'm going to finish off this presentation because this is peering days. I just want to finish by looking at the question of what part will the internet play in all this, with a couple of references to Hollywood. So will it be like Terminator 3, where the internet is the brain? Will it be like iRobot, where Vicky is like a mainframe computer contained within one room? Or will it be like Chappie, where the brain is all within the robot's head? And really, whether the internet is the brain or used as just a learning and communication medium, the implications for the human race are going to be revolutionary. Now, when I first presented a very much cut down version of these thoughts at the Links meeting in London in November, I said it will be the biggest change to society since the Industrial Revolution, providing potentially enormous opportunities and benefits, but also potentially enormous challenges. Having had time to put more thought into it, I actually believe that it might be the most revolutionary event in Earth's history since the creation of life itself. Thank you very much.